Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Coffee with Crestwood series. Thank you for joining this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone has been muted upon entry. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please add them to the Q&A section in this Teams webinar. As our leader for this webinar, Kayla, will be monitoring. At the end of this presentation, we will be addressing any additional questions that you have. I'm Colleen Schills, Director of Customer Success here at Crestwood Associates, and welcome you again to this webinar that we're having. And I am joined today by Robert Sternberg, our Director of Acumatica Services, and looking forward to the content that Robert is going to be reviewing with us today. In today's agenda, Robert is going to cover how you can elevate your production schedule. So as a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A section so we can get you the answers that you're looking for. And with that, I'm turning it over to you, Robert. Take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Colleen. Can you see me okay in my slide as well?
Yes, you are good.
Wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you have your coffee in hand. We're going to be covering three main topics today. The first is understanding some key terms around production scheduling, exploring some Acumatica tools, and then learning what you can do to take your production scheduling to the next level. Acumatica is a tool that is built for growth and advancement, and we would like to see that in the production scheduling area. So the first thing we're going to do is break down the difference between finite and infinite scheduling. Infinite scheduling, much like a cup of coffee and a thermos, you can pour that thermos into your cup of coffee, and eventually it will overflow. So infinite scheduling allows us to moderate that to the best of our ability and essentially try to keep that coffee cup from overflowing. That is in contrast to finite scheduling, which has a set parameter around the coffee cup. So maybe how much coffee it would hold. And that allows us to strategically and with a formula, keep that coffee cup at the ideal level. So today we're going to talk about some of the tools that we can use in Acumatica and in general to help moderate that flow. The first is work center capacity. And this is the maximum amount of work you can perform at a specific operation. So you can imagine a work center floor with 8 welding centers and 8 individual welders. We would have a capacity based on that specific criteria. We can add in criteria to the capacity formula in terms of skill, in terms of capabilities. Going to the welding example, we might be able to weld stainless steel only in one of those particular 8 work centers. So that's the first terminology we're going to cover today on our path to finite scheduling. If we look to how that correlates to a tool in Acumatica, we call this tool work center capacity, and we're able to determine our availability around what we call blocks. And those blocks are just what I mentioned before, periods in time around a particular skill, capability, and overall capacity in this work center. Blocks are divisions of an hour, and that would be up to you to determine if you want to schedule in very finite blocks, maybe down to 5 minutes, if our turnaround time for our manufacturing process is shorter, or even up to a single hour or multiple hours if we have production orders that take a longer period of time. So work center capacity is something that will come in to the challenge of getting us from from infinite to finite scheduling. So work center capacity is the first piece of terminology. We can combine that with production cycle time. And production cycle time is the amount of time we'll spend on a particular item. And that's inside of our bill of material. So production cycle time takes us into that next stage of really determining what our capacity is for our production process. Inside of Acumatica, production cycle time is broken down into a couple of key areas. And I like to walk through this with a paint shop example. So we're in our paint shop, and the first step in the process is to set up. We put up plastic sheets around our work center to make sure overspray does not touch other parts. And it takes some time to put up the plastic, make sure it's not going to move. Maybe you have clamps or tools that we need to get ready. And that is all encompassed in the setup time element of our production cycle. Inside of our spray booth, we're going to have a certain amount of space, and that's going to be the number of units that we can work on at a single point in time. Acumatica calls that the run units. So we might have a series of 10 parts in front of us that we can spray all together. To accomplish those 10 parts, we call that a run time. And it's specific to the number of units we're able to produce in that runtime. So it might take us 10 minutes to spray those 10 items. That would be our run units and run time. Additionally, we can track machine units and machine time, which would be the number of sprayers we're going to use in the booth and the amount of time we need to be actively using the sprayer. Maybe our paint booths are set up next to each other and we're able to have a shared spray gun. In that case, we might only be using that spray gun for half of the time that would be accomplished in the runtime we previously mentioned. So we'd say 5 minutes is spent spraying, and the rest is spent actually working on the material itself. After we finish spraying, there will be some amount of time that the parts need to dry for, and we call that the queue time. So this is post-production waiting time that it would take before we put any final polish on the item. That final polish would go into the finish time. Maybe it's a final lacquer over the items, but it can only be placed once the original paint is dried. Finally, we'll have some period of time that would take to move those units to the next portion of the process. And that's what we call the move time. So this is quite detailed in the areas we can record in Acumatica of our process. And that's a lot of what today is focused on. Where do we start? So to start, let's focus on the runtime. The runtime and run units are the most critical elements. Those are elements 2 and 3 in our list. And it allows us to break down what the core process entails. As we get more robust in our processes and in our scheduling, we can break out additional items. But for right now, let's start with runtime and run units. How long does it take for us to accomplish the primary task? In our example, that was painting the individual units. And then how many units are we going to batch together? Everything that we just spoke about can go under the term production cycle time. You might hear this also referred to as manufacturing lead time or MLT. After the production cycle time, we're really taking our first big step to move from finite to infinite scheduling. And when I mentioned at the top of the call, infinite scheduling has quite a bit of complexity even in itself. And you can use Acumatica tools to do that. So we can record priority of a particular production process. We can tailor that to material availability. And then also we look at real-time completion rates. If today your scheduler is walking around and handing out a job once the previous one was complete, that's a form of infinite scheduling. And there are different levels to infinite scheduling as well. It's not continuing to pour until everything overflows. It's tailoring how fast you're pouring. And it's looking at all of the demands inside of the system. So infinite scheduling can get quite complex even in itself. Taking it to the next level, that's where we incorporate that planned production time. That's where we incorporate the work center capacity. And we add a formula around what it means for us to schedule our processes. So the infinite to finite scheduling move is not something that happens at a point in time. It's a process. So let's talk about Acumatica tools that are going to help us through that process. The first I want to call out is Work Center Dispatch. And Work Center Dispatch can be used in the infinite scheduling state to help regulate all of those metrics. One that I like to call out is the fourth over from the left. That's dispatch priority. In Acumatica, that value can be 1 through 10, 1 being the highest. And that will automatically sort our list along with other helpful information like the planned start date, the item, the quantity we're going to produce. With this information, we can really start to have more control over how we dispatch work to our individual work centers. This is something that I've seen quite often turn into a dashboard. The dashboard can help our individual work centers, as we see in column 1, regulate their own workflow. So instead of handing out those papers as people complete their production process and come to us, they're allowed to take that initiative and work towards the next production order on their own. This is one step closer towards being more robust in our scheduling processes. The next is Work Center Capacity. This is a tool in Acumatica that lets us see the current utilization of all of our work centers. We are moving more into our finite process with this tool, but we're still allowed to regain some control over what our utilization percentage looks like, which is in our last column on the right, towards the amount of production orders we're releasing to each individual work center. So Work Center Capacity can be a fantastic tool for continuing to improve even your finite processes. Ideally, our work centers will be utilized in a very healthy state, I should say. We're not utilizing our work centers and we're not underutilizing them either. So Work Center Capacity is a screen that we can monitor to regulate our production release process. The next, I really want to dig into the cycle time content. This is what we spoke to towards the beginning of the section. And if I look directly in the center of my page, we see columns for setup time, run units, runtime, machine units, so on and so forth. Again, as you start this process, I really want you to focus on runtime and run units. That's where the bulk of our scheduling will take place. You can start entering this data today. You can start recording this data today. This is not something where you need to make the jump to finite scheduling to start improving your estimates of runtime and run units. That's where I'd really like to focus as we're making that transition from infinite to finite scheduling. So that's bill of material and cycle time. The next screen we're going to talk about is rough cut planning. And rough cut planning is all of our production orders and their metrics so we can start to identify when we're going to begin this order, when we plan to complete this order, and if we have any constraints. Do we have the material available? Are we going to move production orders around for a particular project or a particular customer? Everything is starting to fold in from our infinite world of looking at priorities to our finite world of looking at our capacity. So rough cut planning is a workbench of sorts that we can really start to refine our scheduling state. There's a term in this screen called firm, and firm is your ability to lock in a production order. That really adds the production order to a schedule in a state that we can draw dependence from it. We can draw dependencies from it as well. So you're starting to build out an entire plan. In Acumatica, that plan, once firm, will lead you to your Work Center schedule screen. Your Work Center schedule screen shows all of your firm production orders when they plan to start and end. This is another screen where even in the infinite world, we can start to be more refined. If I look at columns 4, 5, and 6, I see start time, end time, and schedule time. In an infinite world, you'll see production schedules start and end at the exact same minute, just like the example you see on the screen today. but your schedule time is starting to pull in more information from where we added data into our run time and run units state. So we can start to draw even more conclusions around whether that cup is going to overfill or not. So schedule time, start time, and end time are what we should be focusing on for our work center schedule. Acumatica has a fantastic tool to do that. It's called the schedule board, and this gives us a visual representation of our production orders and how they align at the top between production orders and towards the bottom on our work centers. For the schedule board, we're also able to see any dependencies. So when you see a diamond, that's Acumatica telling you there's more information. We can move our mouse right over any of the rectangles or diamonds on this screen and get more detail. Is this for a particular customer? Is this a particular production order? What are we producing? And it allows us to make meaningful decisions for our production process. So the schedule board is the last tool that I really want us to be aware of as we work more towards that infinite state. So key takeaways from this process. Refining your infinite schedule is just as important as getting to that finite state. We can add in our runtime and run units. We can adjust our priorities on a customer or production order level. We can record and log our production cycle time, so we're continuing to improve the data that's in our system. And then finally, we can determine predictable work center capacity. We can look at our shifts. We can look at how much time it's taking to complete each particular order. And we can start to work into those blocks that we can schedule in Acumatica. So in takeaway, refine, record, and determine your next steps. I now want to open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions at all, we're happy to answer them. We are going to be monitoring the chat. So if we don't get into anything today, we'll be following up as well.
That was great content, Robert. Thanks a lot for presenting that to everybody. While we were going through our slides, Kayla was able to shoot over to me a couple of questions that came through. So the first one, if you can help me address and answer this question would be great, is what license is required to implement work centers? And I believe that it's just the manufacturing edition. I don't know of any other license that we need to be able to bring to the table for that. Is there anything else that you can think of on your end?
Work centers are available in any manufacturing edition product.
Okay. All right. Great. And then the second question that I have is, what if you don't have work centers and you want to set up production? Do you have to set up a work center? Like, if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on that for the individual.
Absolutely. So production orders are broken down into operations, and operations are performed at a work center. So if you're just starting in your manufacturing journey, it's important that we have an area to complete work, and Crestwood can absolutely help you along with that process. Work centers are really somewhere that we'll be accomplishing our tasks. So each production order must have at least one operation and one work center to go along with it.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Good to know. Thank you. And I think the last question that I've seen come through is, what is the best method for moving around production orders? If I have a new rush order that came in, how do I handle that?
The best way to do that would be to adjust the priority, which you can do on the production order maintenance screen. And you can adjust that priority. The screens that we looked at today, the Work Center dispatch, will adjust as well. And that will allow you to really change how you prioritize your production orders.
All right. Wow, this was some really great content. I know I learned something and I love it when I do. So just wanted to circle around and talk about some insights and next steps here. So today on the webinar, Robert walked us through on the terminology and considerations. Did a great job on that as it relates to production scheduling. We talked about Acumatica out of the box. where we are today and where we're going. And then what to do if you need more now. If you're seeing this content and you're really interested in wanting to know more, to learn, we're here for you. Definitely reach out to your customer success manager at Crestwood. If you're not too sure who that is, then definitely do not hesitate to reach out to Robert or myself. And with that, Robert, I think we're going to wrap things up and I really appreciate everybody attending today. And thank you for joining Coffee with Crestwood.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.